The moment you choose to give when you have nothing, that's when everything changes. The rain fell hard enough to blur the city into streaks of gray and gold, pooling along the cracked sidewalk of a nearly empty bus stop where Ethan Cole stood with his shoulders hunched, his breath visible in the cold October air. His fingers curled tight inside sleeves that were already damp from the storm, the kind of night where most people hurried past without looking twice, except he did look, because across from him sat a woman, completely still, her thin dress soaked through her arms, wrapped around herself not in panic but in quiet endurance, as if she had already accepted the cold instead of fighting it, and something about that unsettled him more than any cry for help could have. Ethan hesitated for just a second, glancing down at his own jacket, the last decent thing he owned after a month of everything going wrong, job gone, savings drained, pride barely holding together. Then he exhaled slowly, stepped forward, and without a word slipped the jacket off his shoulders, and placed it gently around hers, his hands brushing the fabric as he adjusted it to keep the rain out. She looked up at him then, her eyes clear despite the storm, not surprised, not grateful in the usual way, just attentive like she was studying a detail no one else noticed. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, her voice calm, steady, almost out of place in the chaos of rain hitting pavement and distant traffic humming through wet streets. Ethan gave a small shrug, already stepping back into the cold. "Yeah, I did," he replied, his voice quieter than the storm but firm enough to carry meaning. She tilted her head slightly as if measuring his answer. "Why?" she asked, and for a moment he didn't answer, not because he didn't know, but because the truth felt too simple. "Because someone should," he said finally, his breath catching slightly in the chill as the wind picked up. The bus headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the rain like a promise of warmth neither of them seemed to rush toward. She stood slowly, the oversized jacket now shielding her from the worst of the storm, and for a brief second, as lightning flickered across the sky, something gleamed beneath her sleeve, a watch far too refined for someone sitting alone in the rain, but it vanished just as quickly as she pulled the fabric tighter. Ethan didn't notice. He was already turning away, already bracing himself against the cold he had just given away. The bus pulled up with a hiss of brakes, doors opening, but she didn't step on right away. Instead she looked back at him one last time, her gaze lingering with something unreadable, something intentional. And then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the night, leaving Ethan alone under the rain, unaware that this quiet moment, this simple choice, had just been witnessed more closely than he could ever imagine. The rain did not stop that night, and neither did the cold. It followed Ethan all the way home through narrow streets and flickering streetlights, seeping into his bones as he walked the last half-mile to his apartment, his shirt clinging to his skin, his hands shaking not just from the temperature but from exhaustion that had been building for weeks. He pushed open the door to his small studio, the heater rattling uselessly in the corner, barely pushing out warm air. He stood there for a moment, dripping onto the worn wooden floor, then let out a quiet breath. Something about the night felt different, not better, not easier, just quieter, like a weight had shifted without him noticing. He changed into dry clothes and sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the empty space where his jacket should have been. It had been the last expensive thing he owned, the last reminder of who he used to be, and now it was gone, given away without a second thought. He rubbed his hands together, slowly replaying the moment in his mind, the way she looked at him, not with surprise, not even with gratitude, but with something sharper, something that made him feel like he had just answered a question he did not know he was being asked. He shook his head lightly and reached for his phone, the screen lighting up with a single notification, an email, subject line simple and direct. "Whitmore Group would like to invite you to a final interview tomorrow at 9:30 in the morning." Ethan frowned, reading it twice, then a third time. Whitmore Group was not just any company, it was one of the most powerful investment firms in the country, known for turning failing businesses into billion-dollar successes. He had applied weeks ago, more out of desperation than hope, and never expected a response, let alone a final interview. He glanced at the time, almost midnight. His heart began to beat a little faster, not from excitement but from disbelief. He stood up and paced the small room, running a hand through his hair. This could change everything, or it could be nothing at all. He had learned not to trust sudden opportunities, not after everything that had fallen apart so quickly before. Still, he could not ignore it. He set his phone down carefully, as if it might disappear if he moved too quickly, and looked around his apartment, the peeling paint, the quiet, the life he had been trying to rebuild piece by piece. Tomorrow was his last real chance. He knew that, He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, and, for a brief moment, the image of her return standing in the rain, wrapped in his jacket, her voice calm, her question lingering why. He closed his eyes slowly, the answer still echoing in his chest, because someone should, and somewhere in the distance beyond his understanding, that answer had already reached further than he could see. Morning came too quickly, pale light slipping through the thin curtains as Ethan stood in front of the small mirror above his sink, adjusting the collar of his only remaining dress shirt, the fabric slightly worn but still clean, still presentable. He stared at his reflection longer than necessary, as if searching for the version of himself that used to walk into rooms with certainty instead of quiet hope. His hands paused for a second, remembering the weight of the jacket that was no longer there. Then he straightened his shoulders, exhaled slowly, and stepped out into the crisp air. The city looked different in daylight, less forgiving, more honest, every cracked sidewalk and passing stranger a reminder that no one was waiting for him to succeed. He took the subway downtown, surrounded by people who moved with purpose, their coats dry, their conversations distant, while his mind stayed fixed on the email, on the name Whitmore Group repeating like a quiet echo. When he finally stepped out onto Madison Avenue, the building rose in front of him like something out of another life, glass and steel reflecting the morning sun, polished doors opening to a lobby that smelled faintly of marble and expensive coffee. Ethan hesitated just outside for half a second, then walked in. The warmth hit him immediately, followed by the soft hum of voices and the distant clicking of heels against polished floors. He approached the front desk, gave his name, and was directed to the 23rd floor. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have, each floor number lighting up one by one, his reflection shifting in the mirrored walls, until the doors finally opened to a quiet, controlled space where everything seemed deliberate. He was greeted by a receptionist who offered a polite smile and gestured toward a seating area. "They will be with you shortly, Mr. Cole," she said, and Ethan nodded, sitting down carefully, his hands resting on his knees. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere out of sight. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time felt strange in that space, stretched and compressed at once. He glanced around, taking in the subtle details, the artwork, the perfectly aligned furniture, the sense that every inch of the place had been designed by people who understood power. Then the door at the end of the hallway opened, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to draw attention, and footsteps followed, steady, measured, familiar in a way he could not immediately place. Ethan looked up, his breath catching before he could stop it, because walking toward him, composed and completely dry, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that fit like it had been made for her alone, was the woman from the rain, her hair neatly styled, her posture effortless, her presence commanding in a way that made the entire room feel smaller. She stopped a few feet in front of him, her eyes meeting his with the same calm intensity, the same quiet awareness, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the memory of the bus stop hanging between them like something unfinished. Then she tilted her head slightly, almost the same way she had the night before, and said, "Good morning, Ethan," as if she had always known his name, as if this moment had been waiting for him long before he ever stepped into the building. Silence settled between them, not awkward, not uncertain, but heavy with recognition. Ethan slowly rose to his feet, his mind racing to catch up with what his eyes were already telling him. The woman from the rain was standing here, composed, confident, completely transformed, yet somehow exactly the same steady gaze, the same quiet presence that had cut through the storm the night before. "You," he began, but the word fell short, incomplete. She offered a small, knowing smile, not warm, not distant, just precise. "Claire Whitmore," she said, extending her hand, her voice calm, professional, as if introducing herself for the first time even though they both knew it was not. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking her hand, her grip firm, controlled, the kind of handshake that did not ask for respect but expected it. "Ethan Cole," he replied, his voice steadier now, though his thoughts were anything but. She gestured toward the glass doors behind her. "Come with me," she said, turning without waiting for confirmation, and he followed. The room beyond was larger, brighter, a long table at the center surrounded by empty chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows stretching across one wall, the city spread out beneath them like a living map. Claire moved to the far end of the table and took her seat with quiet authority. Ethan remained standing for a moment before sitting across from her, the distance between them measured not in feet but in everything. that had changed since last night. She placed a thin folder on the table, sliding it toward him with deliberate care. Your application, she said simply. Ethan glanced down at it, then back at her. You knew, he said, not as a question but as a realization forming in real time. Claire did not deny it. I knew enough, she replied, her eyes steady on his. Your background, your work, your recent setbacks. There was no judgment in her tone, only clarity, which somehow felt more exposing than criticism ever could. Ethan leaned back slightly, trying to steady the moment. So last night was what? He asked, his brow tightening just a little. A coincidence? Claire tilted her head again, that same subtle motion, but this time there was something different behind it, something sharper. Do you believe in coincidences, Ethan? She asked, her voice softer now but not less controlled. He did not answer immediately because the truth was, he did not know anymore. She leaned forward just slightly, her hands resting lightly on the table. I was waiting, she said, and the words landed carefully, intentionally. Not for you specifically, she added, but for someone. Ethan frowned, confusion mixing with curiosity. Someone who would do what you did, she continued, her gaze never leaving his. Without knowing who I was, without expecting anything in return, without even being seen. The room felt quieter somehow, the city outside fading into the background as her words settled in. Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, not at the suit, not at the setting, but at the person who had sat in the rain as if it meant nothing. So it was a test? He said slowly, and for the first time, Claire allowed a faint shift in expression, not quite a smile, not quite an admission, but something close. It was an observation. She corrected gently. A very rare one. She paused, then added. And you passed it without trying? Ethan exhaled quietly, the weight of the moment pressing in. And now? He asked. What happens now? Claire's eyes softened just slightly, just enough to be noticed if you were paying attention. Now, she said, her voice returning to that calm certainty. We find out what a man who gives everything when he has nothing can do when he finally has something to lose. The room did not move, but something inside Ethan did, a quiet shift that he could not name yet. He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped together as if grounding himself in something real. You are offering me a job, he said carefully, choosing each word with intention. Claire watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable, then she shook her head once, slow and deliberate. No, she replied. I am offering you a decision. The distinction landed heavier than he expected. Ethan frowned slightly, his mind searching for clarity. What kind of decision? He asked. Claire reached for the folder and opened it, turning it toward him. Inside were not just documents but projections, ownership charts, long-term strategies, things far beyond the scope of a standard position. Ethan's eyes scanned the pages quickly, then slowed, then stopped, because this was not an interview package, this was something else entirely, something that did not belong to someone in his position. This is? He paused, looking up at her. This is a partnership structure. Claire nodded once. It is, she said, her tone steady. Minority at first, earned through performance but real, not symbolic. Ethan let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding, his chest rising slowly as the weight of it settled in. You do not know me, he said, not as a defense but as a fact. Claire's eyes held his without hesitation. I know enough, she replied, echoing her earlier words, but this time they carried more depth. I know how you respond when no one is watching. I know what you do when there is no advantage, no audience, no reward. She leaned back slightly, her posture still composed. That tells me more than any resume ever could. Ethan looked down again at the pages, then back at her, something inside him resisting, not out of fear but out of principle. And what if I say no? He asked. Claire did not react immediately, she simply studied him as if that question mattered more than anything else he had said. Then you walk out of here, she answered calmly. And nothing changes for me. A brief pause. But everything stays the same for you. There was no threat in her voice, no pressure, just a clear statement of reality. Ethan sat back, absorbing it. The city stretched out behind her through the glass, vast and indifferent, the kind of place that did not offer second chances often. He thought about the night before, the rain, the cold, the simple choice that had not felt like a choice at all. And now this moment, this room, this unexpected turning point. It felt almost unreal, like stepping into someone else's life without permission. Why me? He asked again, quieter this time, not challenging, just searching. Claire's expression softened just slightly, enough to show something human beneath the control. Because you did not hesitate, she said. And people who do not hesitate to do the right thing are very rare. she paused, then added. And very dangerous in the best possible way. Ethan let out a small breath, almost a quiet laugh, not out of humor but out of disbelief. He looked down at his hands, then slowly closed the folder, not rejecting it. Not accepting it, just holding it, feeling its weight. If I take this, he said, lifting his gaze back to hers. I do not want it because of what happened last night. Claire nodded slightly, as if she had been waiting for that. Good, she said. Because if that was the only reason, I would not offer it. Another pause, quieter now, more personal. I offered it because you proved something most people spend a lifetime pretending to have. Ethan held her gaze, the silence stretching but not uncomfortable, just full, and for the first time since he walked into the building, he felt something settle into place, not certainty, not yet, but direction, the kind that does not come from opportunity, but from understanding who you are when everything else is gone. The silence did not break, it deepened, settling between them like something that needed to be respected rather than filled. Ethan ran his thumb slowly along the edge of the folder, feeling the slight texture of the paper as if it could anchor him to the moment. His thoughts moved carefully now, no longer rushed, no longer reactive. If I say yes, he said, his voice steady but quieter than before, then it is because I believe I can earn it, not because you decided I already have. Claire watched him closely, her expression unchanged, but there was a subtle shift in her eyes, something closer to approval than before. That is the only reason I would accept, she replied, her tone calm, certain. Ethan nodded once, more to himself than to her, then placed the folder flat on the table, not pushing it away, not pulling it closer, just letting it exist between them. Then I will need to understand everything. He continued. The risks, the expectations, what happens if I fail? Claire did not hesitate. Then you fail, she said simply, no softness, no hesitation, just truth. And you learn faster than most people ever do, she added, her voice lowering just slightly. But I do not invest in people who are afraid of that. Ethan let out a slow breath, the honesty of her answer settling something inside him. It was not comfort she was offering, it was clarity, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. He leaned forward slightly, his posture no longer uncertain. And what happens if I succeed? He asked, not with arrogance but with genuine curiosity. Claire allowed the faintest hint of a smile, almost imperceptible. Then you will understand why this was never about a job, she said, her gaze steady. It was about alignment. The word lingered, unfamiliar but precise. Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly, as if something had finally clicked into place. He reached for a pen resting beside the folder, his fingers closing around it with quiet determination. But he did not open the folder yet. Instead he looked up at her one more time. Last question, he said. Claire inclined her head slightly, giving him space to continue. Last night, he began, his voice softer now, almost reflective. If I had walked past you, if I had done nothing. Claire did not look away, not even for a second. Then you would not be here, she answered, and there was no judgment in it, only fact. Ethan held her gaze, absorbing that, not as pressure, not as regret, but as understanding, the kind that settles deep and stays there. He nodded once, then finally opened the folder again. The pages no longer overwhelming, just detailed, structured, real. He signed his name carefully, not rushed, not hesitant, each letter deliberate, as if marking more than just an agreement. When he finished, he placed the pen down gently, the sound barely audible against the polished surface. Claire watched him for a moment, then reached forward and closed the folder, her movements precise, controlled, but there was something different now, something warmer beneath the surface. Welcome to Whitmore Group, Ethan, she said, and this time it did not sound like a formality. It sounded like the beginning of something that had already been set in motion long before either of them realized it. Outside the window, the city moved as it always did, unaware that in a quiet room high above the streets, a single choice made in the rain had just rewritten the direction of a life. The pen was still on the table when the weight of what he had just done finally caught up to him. Not all at once, but in quiet layers. Ethan sat there for a moment longer, his hand resting lightly against the closed folder. As if confirming it was real, Claire rose first, smooth and composed, already shifting into motion. As though decisions like this were simply part of the rhythm of her day. There is no orientation, she said as she walked toward the glass doors, her voice steady. No gradual transition, no time to adjust. Ethan stood, following her without hesitation now, something inside him already aligning with that pace. You start now, she added, pushing the door open and stepping into the hallway. The energy outside felt different, sharper, Faster, people moved with purpose, conversations low and efficient, the kind of place where hesitation did not belong. Claire continued forward, not looking back, trusting he would keep up. Your first assignment, she said, turning slightly as they approached another conference room, is not about numbers. Ethan glanced at her, surprised. It is about people, she continued, opening the door. Inside sat 3 executives already waiting, their expressions neutral but curious, their attention shifting immediately to Claire and then to him. This is Ethan Cole, she said simply, no explanation, no build-up, just a name placed into a space that demanded it carry weight. Ethan felt the room assess him instantly, not openly, not aggressively, but with the quiet precision of people who were used to evaluating value quickly. Claire stepped aside slightly, giving him the space without announcing it. They have been working on a deal for 6 weeks, she said, her voice calm, almost detached. It is not working. Ethan looked at the table, at the documents, at the subtle tension in the room, then back at her. And you want me to fix it? He said, not as a question but as an understanding forming in real time. Claire met his gaze briefly. I want you to see it, she corrected, then added. The rest is up to you. She moved to the side of the room, not sitting, not leading, just observing. The executives exchanged brief glances, then one of them slid a folder toward Ethan. We have tried every angle, the man said, his tone measured. Nothing aligns. Ethan took the folder, opened it, and began to read. The numbers were complex, the structure layered, but beneath it all he noticed something else, something quieter. The disconnect was not in the data, it was in the intent. He looked up after a moment, his expression focused, no longer uncertain. You are negotiating against each other, he said, his voice calm but direct. The room stilled slightly. One of the executives frowned. That is how negotiations work. Ethan shook his head once, not dismissive, just clear. Not if you are trying to build something that lasts. He leaned forward slightly, placing the folder back on the table. You are all protecting positions instead of defining a shared outcome. The words landed differently than expected, not as criticism but as clarity. Claire watched from the side, her expression unchanged, but her attention sharper now. One of the executives sat back slowly, considering it. And you think you can change that? He asked. Ethan did not rush his answer, he simply met the man's gaze. I think you already know it needs to change, he replied. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was not tension, it was recognition, subtle but real. Claire stepped forward slightly then, just enough to shift the energy without interrupting it. Good, she said softly, not to the room but to herself, and in that moment it became clear this was never about giving Ethan an opportunity. It was about placing him exactly where he needed to be, to see if he could become what he already was when no one was watching. The room did not return to noise, it shifted into something sharper, more focused, the kind of silence that comes when people realize they might have missed something obvious. Ethan remained seated, but his posture changed, no longer tentative, no longer reacting. He was engaging now, seeing beyond what was written. One of the executives leaned forward, fingers interlocked, studying him with a more deliberate attention. Explain that, the man said, not dismissive but not convinced either. Ethan nodded slightly, his eyes moving across the table, not avoiding anyone, not challenging, just steady. You are negotiating terms, he said. But none of you are aligned on what success actually looks like. He tapped lightly on the folder, not to emphasize authority but to anchor the idea. You are protecting percentages, timelines, control but not the outcome. Another executive shifted in her seat, her expression tightening just slightly. That is because outcomes are uncertain, she replied, her tone controlled. Ethan met her gaze without hesitation. No, he said calmly. Outcomes are unclear because you have not defined them together. The distinction settled differently this time, not as a correction but as a mirror. He continued, his voice even measured. Right now, each of you is negotiating for your version of success, which means even if this deal closes it will fail later. The words were not dramatic but they carried weight, the kind that comes from seeing something others overlooked. The room held still again, but this time it leaned toward him, not away. Claire remained near the edge of the space, her presence quiet but undeniable, her eyes fixed on Ethan, not evaluating anymore, but confirming. One of the executives exhaled slowly, leaning back, his expression shifting from resistance to consideration. So what do you suggest? He asked, and the question landed differently, less defensive, more open. Ethan did not rush. He let the silence breathe for a second before answering. Start over. he said, and a slight ripple moved through the room, not disagreement but surprise. He continued before it could settle into resistance. Not with the numbers, with the purpose. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table, steady, grounded. Define what success looks like if this works perfectly, not for one of you, for all of you. He paused, letting that land, then added. Then build the structure around that, not the other way around. The idea was simple, but it cut through layers of complexity that had built up over weeks. One of the executives nodded slowly, almost unconsciously, as if recognizing something they had overlooked. Claire took a small step forward, not interrupting but reinforcing the shift in energy. Continue, she said softly, and it was not a command, it was an invitation. Ethan glanced at her briefly, then back to the table, his focus sharpening. You do not have a negotiation problem, he said. You have a clarity problem. The words were direct but not harsh, and for the first time no one pushed back because it felt true. The room began to change subtly, posture adjusting, attention aligning. Not because Ethan was forcing it, but because he was revealing something that had always been there, and Claire watched it all unfold with quiet precision, because this was the moment she had been waiting for, not the jacket, not the test, but this, the point where character became action and action became influence. And for the first time since he walked into the building, Ethan was no longer being observed, he was being followed. Something shifted after that moment, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that could not be undone. The executives no longer looked at Ethan as an outsider. They looked at him as someone who had just changed the direction of their thinking. One of them leaned forward again, this time not to challenge but to engage. If we redefine success, he said slowly, then everything we have built so far becomes irrelevant. Ethan shook his head slightly, calm, grounded. Not irrelevant, he replied, incomplete. He reached for the folder again, flipping it open with more confidence now, scanning the pages with sharper focus. You have done the hard work, he continued. But you built it around protection, not alignment. Another executive nodded faintly, almost to herself, as if recognizing the truth in that. Claire remained silent, her presence steady, allowing the room to evolve without interference. Ethan placed the folder back down, this time turning it slightly so everyone could see. A subtle shift, but intentional. Let me ask you something, he said, his voice even. If this deal works perfectly, what does that look like in 5 years? The question hung in the air, simple but unfamiliar in the context of everything they had been doing. The executives exchanged brief glances, then one of them spoke, cautiously at first. Sustained growth, he said. Another added, shared control, not constant negotiation. A third voice followed, long-term stability without restructuring every quarter. The answers came slowly, then more clearly, like something being uncovered rather than created. Ethan listened, not interrupting, just guiding with his attention. That is your starting point, he said finally. Not the numbers on those pages. He tapped the folder lightly again. Those changed, this should not. The room grew quieter but more focused, ideas beginning to align instead of compete. One of the executives leaned back, a small breath leaving him as if releasing something he had been holding for weeks. We have been solving the wrong problem, he admitted, not to Ethan but to the room. Claire stepped forward slightly then, her voice calm but carrying authority. Now you are not, she said, and it was not praise, it was confirmation. She looked at Ethan for a brief moment, not with surprise, not even with approval, but with recognition. As if the version of him sitting at that table was exactly the one she had seen in the rain, just revealed more clearly now. The meeting continued, but the energy had changed completely. Conversations became more open, less guarded. The structure began to rebuild itself from the inside out, and Ethan found himself not forcing anything, not trying to prove anything, just seeing what needed to be seen and saying what needed to be said. And people listened, not because of his title, not because of his position, but because what he was saying made sense, and in a place where power usually came from status, that kind of clarity was rare. Claire observed it all without interruption, her hands loosely resting at her sides, her posture unchanged, but her focus unwavering, because this was no longer about whether Ethan belonged in that room. It was about how far he could go once he realized that he did. The meeting did not end the way it usually did. There was no abrupt closing, no polite summaries that meant nothing. Instead it unfolded into something quieter, more intentional, as if everyone in the room understood that they had just crossed a line they could not step back over. Ethan remained seated for a moment after the discussion slowed, his eyes moving across the table, not searching for approval, not waiting for validation, just observing the shift he had helped create. One of the executives closed his folder slowly, a faint smile touching the corner of his expression. "We have been doing this for years," he said, almost to himself, "and somehow we made it more complicated than it needed to be." Another nodded, her posture more relaxed now, less guarded. "We were negotiating fear," she added quietly, and no one disagreed because it was true. Claire stepped forward then, her presence reclaiming the room without effort. "Then remove it," she said simply, and the clarity of her words settled over the group, not as instruction but as permission. The executives began to gather their materials, but their movements were different now, slower, more thoughtful, as if each action carried more weight than before. Ethan stood as well, his body still adjusting to the reality of where he was, what he had just done, and what it meant. As the room gradually emptied, one of the executives paused beside him, offering a brief nod, not formal, not rehearsed, just genuine. "Good insight," the man said, then walked out without waiting for a response. Ethan watched him go, the moment small but meaningful. Claire remained near the window, her gaze fixed on the city below, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. Ethan approached slowly, stopping a few feet beside her, neither of them speaking at first. The silence felt different now, no longer uncertain, just present. "You knew this would happen," Ethan said finally, not accusing, not surprised, just stating what he was beginning to understand. Claire did not turn. Immediately, she let the question settle, then replied, "I knew it could." Her voice calm as always, she shifted her gaze slightly, looking at him through the reflection rather than directly. "The rest was up to you." Ethan let out a quiet breath, his shoulders lowering just a fraction. "You put me in a room I did not belong in," he said. Claire turned then, facing him fully, her expression steady. "No," she replied. "I put you in a room where you had to decide if you did." The distinction landed deeper than anything else she had said that day. Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, not as the woman from the rain, not as the CEO, but as someone who saw things others did not. "And if I had stayed quiet?" he asked. Claire's answer came without hesitation. "Then you would have proven you were not ready." There was no harshness in her tone, only honesty. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing it, not as criticism, but as truth. He turned his gaze back toward the city, the scale of it no longer overwhelming, just expansive, full of possibilities he had not allowed himself to consider before. "What now?" he asked, and for the first time there was a faint shift in Claire's expression, something softer, almost reflective. "Now," she said, "you keep doing exactly what you did in there." She paused, then added, "But this time people will be watching." The words lingered, not as pressure but as a reminder. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, letting them settle, understanding that what had begun as a simple act in the rain had turned into something far more complex, far more significant, and far from over, because this was not the end of a story, it was the moment where it truly began. The hallway felt quieter after that conversation, but not empty, more like it was holding something that had just begun to unfold. Ethan walked beside Claire without speaking, their pace unhurried but purposeful, the subtle hum of the office continuing around them as if nothing had changed. Yet everything had. People glanced at him now, not out of curiosity alone, but recognition, quiet, measured, the kind that spreads without words. Claire stopped near a smaller conference room and pushed the door open, gesturing for him to step inside. This room was different, less formal, more contained, a space for conversation rather than performance. Ethan stepped in and turned to face her, the distance between them smaller now, not in space, but in understanding. Claire closed the door behind them softly, the sound final but not heavy. She did not sit, instead she remained standing across from him, her posture relaxed but precise. "There is something you need to understand," she said, her voice steady, not instructional but intentional. Ethan nodded once, his attention fully on her. "What happened in that room," she continued, "was not impressive because you were right." She paused just long enough for the meaning to settle. "It was because you were clear." Ethan absorbed that, the distinction subtle but significant. Claire took a step closer, not invading, just narrowing the space. "Most people in positions of power learn how to speak," she said. "Very few learn how to see." The words landed differently than anything she had said before. Less about opportunity, more about responsibility. Ethan's brow tightened slightly, not in confusion but in focus. "And you think I see things differently," he said. Claire held his gaze, unwavering. "I think you have not learned how to ignore what you see," she corrected, and that shift changed everything because it was not a skill she was praising, it was an instinct she was protecting. Ethan let out a slow breath, his shoulders lowering slightly. "That is not always an advantage," he said quietly. Claire's expression softened just enough to acknowledge the truth in that. No, she agreed. It is not. She glanced toward the glass wall where the city stretched beyond, then back to him. But it is rare, she added. And in this place rarity matters more than perfection. The room fell into a brief silence, not uncomfortable, just reflective. Ethan looked down for a moment, then back at her. Why do you care? He asked, not challenging. Just honest. Claire did not answer immediately. She studied him, not evaluating, not testing, just considering how much to say. Then she spoke, quieter than before. Because I built everything you see out there. She gestured slightly toward the city. By learning how to see what others miss. She paused, her voice steady but carrying something deeper now. And I learned very early that if you lose that, you lose everything. Ethan listened, not interrupting, not reacting, just taking it in. Claire stepped back slightly, restoring the space between them but not the distance. You are not here because of what you gave, she said. You are here because of what you did not compromise. The words settled in a way that felt permanent. Ethan nodded slowly, understanding that this was not about proving himself once. It was about maintaining something that could be lost just as easily as it had been revealed. Claire turned toward the door, her hand resting lightly on the handle. There will be more rooms, she said. More people, more pressure, more reasons to become something easier. She glanced back at him, her expression calm but firm. Do not. And it was not a command, it was a warning wrapped in trust. Ethan stood there for a moment after she opened the door, watching the movement of the office beyond, the rhythm, the expectations, the weight of it all, and for the first time, he did not feel like he was stepping into something unfamiliar. He felt like he was stepping into something that had been waiting for him to arrive exactly as he was. The door closed softly behind Claire, but her words did not leave with her. They lingered, settling into the quiet corners of Ethan's mind as he stepped back into the flow of the office. The rhythm felt different now, not because the environment had changed, but because he had. People moved past him with purpose, voices low, decisions being made in real time, and for the first time, he did not feel like an observer. He felt placed, not comfortably, not completely, but intentionally. He walked down the hallway slowly, absorbing the details he had overlooked before, the subtle exchanges, the unspoken hierarchies, the way people listened when something mattered and ignored what did not. He noticed how often clarity was replaced with confidence, how easily certainty could mask confusion, and he understood what Claire meant. Seeing was not the hard part, keeping it was. He reached a glass wall overlooking another conference space. Inside, a different team was mid-discussion, voices slightly raised, tension visible in posture rather than words. He paused for a moment, watching, not intruding, just observing. Patterns began to reveal themselves, interruptions, assumptions, people defending ideas they had not fully examined. It was familiar, not because of experience in this building, but because it existed everywhere. He exhaled quietly and moved on, not stepping in, not yet, understanding that not every room was his to enter, not every moment his to shape. As he continued down the corridor, a young analyst approached him hesitantly, holding a tablet close to his chest. Mr. Cole, he said, his voice careful, they asked me to give this to you. Ethan took the tablet, nodding once. The screen displayed a set of projections, incomplete, slightly misaligned, but not wrong, just unfinished. He glanced up. What do you think is missing? He asked. The analyst froze for a second, surprised by the question, then looked back at the screen, uncertainty crossing his face. I am not sure, he admitted. Ethan handed the tablet back, his tone calm, not correcting, just guiding. Start there, he said. If you are not sure what is missing, that is the first thing you need to understand. The analyst nodded slowly, not fully confident, but no longer lost, and walked away with a different kind of focus. Ethan watched him go for a moment, recognizing something in that hesitation, something he had felt not long ago. Then he turned and continued walking, the weight of the place settling differently on his shoulders, not as pressure, but as responsibility. He reached a quiet corner near the windows, the city stretching endlessly below, cars moving like quiet lines of intention, people invisible from that height, yet each carrying their own version of urgency. He rested his hand lightly against the glass, the cool surface grounding, his reflection faint beside the skyline, and for a moment the image of the rain returned, the bus stopped, the silence, the choice that had not felt like a decision at all. And now here he was, in a place where every decision carried consequence, every word had weight. He closed his eyes briefly, not to escape, but to center, understanding something clearly now. This was not about proving he belonged, it was about proving he would not lose what brought him here. because the real test was not in the room he had just left, it was in every room that would follow, every moment where it would be easier to stop seeing, easier to agree, easier to become like everyone else. He opened his eyes again, the city sharp, the reflection steady, and for the first time since stepping into this world, he did not feel like he was trying to hold on to something fragile. He felt like he was choosing to protect something that could define everything moving forward. The city did not slow down for anyone, not for success, not for failure, and certainly not for someone standing at the edge of something new. Ethan remained by the window for a moment longer, his reflection steady now, no longer searching for who he used to be, but recognizing who he had become. The noise of the office behind him continued, subtle, constant, a reminder that movement never stopped, decisions never paused, and yet, in that stillness, he understood something clearly. This was not a moment that would define him, it was a pattern he would have to repeat over and over again. He turned away from the glass, stepping back into the flow, not cautiously, not forcefully, just deliberately, each step grounded, each movement intentional. As he walked down the hallway, people no longer looked at him with curiosity alone. There was something else now, something quieter, something closer to expectation, and he felt it, not as pressure but as awareness, the kind that reminds you that what you do next matters just as much as what you have already done. He passed the conference room from earlier, the door slightly open, voices inside calmer, now more aligned, the shift still holding. He did not stop, he did not need to, because he knew that what had changed there was not temporary, it was structural, and that mattered more than any immediate outcome. Further down the hall, he noticed the analyst from before, now seated, focused, reviewing the same projections with a different posture, more engaged, more certain in his process. Ethan slowed for just a second, watching without interrupting, recognizing the small but meaningful shift, then continued on, understanding that influence was not always loud, it did not need to be seen to exist, it only needed to move in the right direction. He reached the elevator and pressed the button, the soft chime echoing lightly as the doors opened. He stepped inside and turned, facing the mirrored wall, his reflection meeting him again, but this time there was no hesitation in it, no searching, just recognition. The doors began to close, and just before they did, a familiar voice stopped them. Ethan, Claire's voice, calm, precise. He reached out instinctively, holding the door open as she stepped inside, the space suddenly smaller, quieter, the city disappearing behind steel doors. They stood side by side in silence for a moment, the elevator beginning its descent, smooth, controlled. "You did not try to impress anyone," she said finally, her gaze forward, not looking at him. Ethan shook his head slightly. "I was not trying to," he replied, and that truth settled easily between them. Claire nodded once, almost to herself. "Good," she said, then turned her head just enough to glance at him. "Because the moment you start doing that, you stop seeing clearly." Ethan absorbed that, the pattern becoming more defined with every word she spoke. "And what if I do not notice when that happens?" he asked, not out of doubt but awareness. Claire's expression remained calm, but her answer carried weight. "Then everything you build will look right," she said. "But it will be wrong." The elevator slowed, the numbers descending one by one, each second stretching slightly longer. Ethan looked forward again, the reflection in the metal doors faint but present, and he understood, this was not about maintaining success, it was about maintaining clarity. The doors opened softly to the lobby, the same marble floors, the same quiet conversations, but it felt different now, not because the space had changed, but because he had. Claire stepped out first, then paused briefly, turning just enough to leave him with one final thought. "The world does not change because of power," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "It changes because of people who do the right thing, even when no one is watching." She held his gaze for a brief second, then walked away, disappearing into the movement of the building. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, the words settling deeper than anything else. Then he stepped forward, not into something new but into something he now understood, because the truth was simple, and it had always been there. The moment he gave away his jacket in the rain, he did not change his life, he revealed it, and everything that followed was just the world catching up to who he already was.